they are coming from. And we'll start with the panel by the speakers. I'll introduce them in a second. And then when we get to the Q&A, you can either raise your hand and speak when you're invited to do so, open your camera and your mic, or you can also put questions into the chat. I'll try to monitor that as well, but sometimes that can be a bit much moderating and reacting to the chat. So if you can speak, and also because it's nicer for the speakers to see who the audience is, it would be very nice if you could do it in person. So we are recording now, and the chat is also open for everyone to use. Today's topic is, well, of course, about work, because that's the overarching topic of that series, the future of work. What kind of future do we want? How could we get there? And as some of you may know, the manifesto on democratizing work from the very beginning has included the social and the ecological dimensions of work, and has also included the imperative to decarbonize work to move towards a sustainable, ecologically sustainable future of work. Now, often because of the way in which academic discussions and also discussions with practitioners work, ecological and social questions get treated separately, and you have different communities looking either at democratic work or healthy work or social work or whatever, and other groups looking at the environmental dimensions, which of course require other forms of input from other disciplines, also that the natural sciences coming in. But in the end, it's one reality we're talking about, and we need to think these things together and find solutions in which we live them together. So a social and ecological future of work. And that's why we've decided to have this session on the concept of circular economy, because that's one of the key concepts when it comes to an ecological future. And the question we want to discuss is basically, what does a circular economy mean for the future of work? What kinds of changes should we expect? Do they go hand in hand with changes towards a more socially sustainable future? Might there also be tensions? And what kind of policies and practices are needed to arrive at a future of work where the economy is circular and work is socially and ecologically sustainable? So that's the topic, and we have three wonderful speakers who will introduce the discussion, each about 7-8 minutes, and then we'll have a few questions for them, and then we'll open it up for everyone. I'll introduce all the speakers now before I hand over for them to do their pitches. The first is Dr. Martin Kuhlmann, who is director of the Sociological Research Institute at the Georg August University of Göttingen in Germany. He's a researcher on the broad fields of sociology of work and labor relations, and he has published on issues like work and new technologies, innovative work policies, sustainable work systems, and current trends in labor relations. And one of the reasons why I've invited him is that he has a recent project on work and labor related to the idea of a circular economy. The second speaker will be Frithjof Laubinger. He's an environmental economist at the Environments Directorate of the OECD, with a focus on waste, resource efficiency, and circular economy policy issues. And he was involved in an OECD work stream on the labor implications of the circular economy. He also master's degree in environmental economics and policy from University College London and a BA degree from Amsterdam University. And the third speaker will be Wairimu Mwangi, who is a director at Loopworks Ventures, an enterprise support organization, and she's currently the Adelphi's implementing partner in Kenya, supporting the Circular Economy Catalyst program. She's a qualified business development specialist in sustainable business assessment and development, environmental policy research, resource efficiency, and conducting capacity building programs. And she's been developing and implementing programs that anchor and promote circular economy and inclusive economic growth for enterprises, public organizations, and development organizations. She holds a master in environment and development from the LSE, and a BA in economics and sociology from the University of Nairobi. So those are the three experts we will start with, and I'm very happy that they've all agreed to be part of our conversation here. As I said, we'll have short pitches by them in this order, then we'll invite them to engage in a discussion. And I saw some of the names of people in the audience, and I know that some of them also have a background in circular economy research or related issues, so I'm sure that we'll also have an intense and lively discussion with the audience after that. So first, I hand over to Martin, who will share his screen, and then, yes, that looks good.
Hello to everybody. So here, now you should see the...
Now you're back at
your
sharing
desktop
your background. Yeah, now your PowerPoint is open.
There we go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, hello to everybody. I want to share with you some preliminary findings from a recent project we are doing, as Lisa mentioned. And just to make 5 ideas, or it's already findings in a nutshell. The first one is that the circular economy and working in the circular economy is a highly differentiated fields. They are quite different companies, quite different organizations. And this has some implications for policy issues. The second one is that there are various types of work and employment in circular economy. I will show a bit of everything later on. The third point is, if you want to promote, support, or ameliorate working in the circular economy in the sense of good and decent work, you have to be both specific according to special types of work and employment organizations and so on. And maybe even more important, you have to be both local and developmental perspective and a regulatory perspective. These two perspectives have to come together. The fourth point is sustainable work. What does it mean? It means human resource oriented. It means regenerative and socio-ecological. So you have to look very closely, not only on working and working conditions, but also on the connection of working and living conditions. And the last point is very important for all these issues is co-design and participation. Co-design means really being engaged in how work processes in other areas are developed, and participation has a more legal, more political approach. So these are my 5 arguments I want to make, and now a bit of content. This is a general model or a general picture about the different steps of the circular economy, and you have to be very aware that these different steps are important, which means design, production, usage, collection, recovery, and raw material extraction. And as you can, or maybe you can imagine, there are quite different companies, quite different organizations, and quite different types of work connected to these different steps. Here is a picture of at least 5 different types of organizations, companies, as well as business models. According to the different steps, collection, production, and so on. And the first one, which often is very much in the focus of discussions about circular economy, is the issue of recycling, disassembly. Often it's done mechanically, handmade, so to say. And this is one point and one type of business model and one type of companies, one type of organizations. The second one is, and this is low tech mostly, there's very less automation in this area. The second point is specialized raw materials, recovering extraction of raw materials. These are often high-tech companies using capital-intensive equipment. The second business model, the second type of companies. The third one is producers of final or intermediate products. The classical examples are paper and glass bottles, for example. There are huge elements of recovery, collection, and so on in these areas, and this depends very much on regulation. The fifth type of organization, which is maybe very important for the future of the circular economy are startups. It's very interesting, at least according to figures on Germany, you have at least as much startups in the area of the circular economy, depending how to define it, as in the area of data IT. Because startups often is a discussion, well, that's IT, tech work, and so on. But basically, there are a lot of startup companies, even in the sector of the circular economy. One important point here is that startups need capital because they don't have profit in that sense. When it comes to capital for having a startup, for working in a startup, you can't rely on the capital market. It's much more government funded, it's much more research funded, and so on. There's an important difference between startups in the IT sector and startups in the circular economy sector. The last type, I just want to mention it, there's various types of firms supporting in the circular economy. So when it comes to work, what does this mean for work? We have I already mentioned it in the 5 points, we have quite different types of work and we have quite different levels of qualifications. On the mechanical recycling side, it's mainly unskilled, low-skilled, semi-skilled employees. In the two middle companies, the raw materials recovery and the producers of intermediate and final products, you have skilled work, a lot of skilled employees, skilled work, and of course, technicians, academics. And on the startup side, you have mostly academics and quite a few technicians in this area. So these are different companies, different business models, and different types of work, but all of these are important for having a circular economy. So we made a picture, and I can share it afterwards. What are the work-related and the labor-related challenges? What's about sustainable work? What's about good and decent work in these areas? And here are some of the main points we identified, challenges that exist, but I don't want to disturb you with all these simple points. Just to make the most important part of the story is that you have very different types of challenges according to these, well, business models, types of companies. On the mechanical side, it's very much about recruiting employees. Maybe it's a bit a German problem because the labor market is still that way that we have a labor shortage in almost several areas. It's a bit puzzling and paradoxical, but it is as it is. So this is one point which is very important because it's hard work, it's not healthy work quite often, and so on. So the big challenge in this type is working conditions, working time, especially pay, and work organization, participation. You have low levels of participation in these type of companies. This is one constellation. I will take the next two ones together because they have a fairly similar situation. It's quite often high technology, capital intensive production. And the biggest point here is, at least in Germany, the research yet is done also only in Germany, it's recruiting and getting employees. So one point. And the second point is, again, working conditions, but there it's only shift work. That's the biggest problem because in these companies, you often or mostly have shift work. And the last point is the startups I want to talk about. And the startups have almost no problem according to work in the more narrow sense. Their biggest problem is labor relations on the one hand. These are informal, and sometimes it's not a problem, but sometimes it is a problem that labor relations are only informal in these type of companies. But the biggest challenge they have is cooperation, networking, interlinking. So if you want to help startups getting more efficient, more effective, then you have to look very much on cooperation, networking, and things like that. So that's it. Here are the 5 points. Once again, it's differentiated, various types of work and employment. You have to be specific. both local, developmental, and regulatory, a bit about sustainable work, what that means, and co-design and participation. These two levels are quite important if you want to have a more broad, more effective, more important circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very tempting to not directly ask questions, but I'll refrain and instead give the word directly to Frithjof.
Thanks, Lisa. I would also have some questions or comments, but I will also refrain and just focus on my own pitch, which I hope you can see now.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's opening up.
It's opening up. Yeah, it's not.
Do you see it?
Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, good day, everyone. I say specifically day because I see we have even colleagues from Australia. Well, that's maybe even night. Colleagues from Australia connected, so that's great to see. My name is Frithjof Laubinger. I work in the Environment Directorate and specifically on circular economy and waste. What I'm talking about is a project that has come to a close by now, but we have looked into the labor market consequences of a circular economy transition a couple of years ago, and I've also done some modeling around this. So, I mean, just to briefly introduce again, when countries talk about the circular economy, or when they basically advertise the attractiveness of a circular economy, they often link to two aspects. One is, of course, reducing waste, reducing resource consumption. But the other one is also that there's a strong emphasis on that the circular economy can bring about additional jobs. So, for instance, the circular economy package says that they can create 170,000 direct jobs. In the French roadmap, they mentioned 300,000 jobs in France, and also Finland mentions approximately 75,000 jobs that can be created. So we were going to look a little bit more into what are actually those implications, where are jobs created, but also where are jobs lost. And that brings me to I just want to give you a bit of a broad overview of what are actually the effects that are in play in any kind of policy change that induces a transition, but also in the transition to the circular economy. So you have different drivers that lead to changes in production modes, in demand patterns, in aggregate income and macroeconomic conditions, as well as changes in international trade and competitiveness. And when we look into the effects on the labor market, there's not just job creations, but there's also job losses in other sectors. There's substitutions from one jobs to the other, but there's also redefinitions of jobs. So jobs can change as we transition in our economy into a more circular economy. And all this all together will then lead to the aggregate labor market impact. So this is just a rough sketch of how it will be modeled, but also all the different elements that you would need to consider when looking into the labor market implications on a macroeconomic scale. So, as I said, we have really looked into this really from a macroeconomic point of view. So if you look into what is actually the distribution of the labor market, depending on the sector, you see on a global scale that actually, so here on the graph, you see the cumulative shares of materials used and employment. And what you see is that as you move from left to the right, that in construction, you have 45% of all the materials that are used in the economy, but construction only employs approximately 8% of the labor market. And then as you move from left to right, you have cumulative additions to that. And once you reach approximately 90% of the consumption so the sectors that together consume 90% of the materials used, you see that there's quite a large gap, that these sectors that consume 90% of all the materials in the economy only employ less than 20% of the labor force. So there's a lot of the labor force that is in relatively low resource consumption, resource intensive sectors. And vice versa, also there's the sectors that consume a lot of resources and that would need to be targeted in policies that focus on a more circular economy, actually employ a relatively small share of the overall labor force. So as part of this work, we have reviewed all kinds of modeling studies that have been done with regards to that look into the labor implications of the circular economy. Those were 15 studies with 45 different scenarios. And what you can see is that most of them predict a positive impact, labor market impact on the of the circular economy transition, but that this employment effect is relatively small. So it's mostly between slightly above plus up to 3% increase. Based on this review, we have also done our own modeling assessment. And I mean, we've written a whole paper about it. It's hard to summarize this in one slide. But basically, what you see is that we, as the OECD, in our modeling exercise, we also conclude with a positive employment, but only if this is done in a material fiscal reform scenario. And this material fiscal reform scenario is basically a scenario where you tax materials used, and then you use those revenues from those taxes to subsidize the labor force. But even if you do this, the overall net employment is very limited. So it's only at about 0.05%. However, this really overshadows that there can be impacts that are more heavily locally. So there can be larger job creations in certain sectors, larger job destructions, and there can also be quite some differences across countries depending on what the economic structure and what the economic structure of the country is. Finally, I just want to close this page on some additional considerations that are important to consider, and maybe we could discuss them a little further in the discussion. Because it's not enough to only talk about the number of jobs. So to only talk about the jobs that are created in one sector or lost in another sector, but it's also important to consider what type of jobs are actually created or lost. So the aspects of job quality or the gender distribution of the jobs that are created and lost, that is also important aspects that would need to be considered. Another question that is important to reflect on is what is actually the future skill composition? So what are the skills that are needed for the jobs that we need in the future for a circular economy? So basically the skills that are needed for more circular jobs. And what education policies do we need to develop in order to strengthen the skill set that is needed for circular jobs? Another question is where those jobs are actually created. Because, I mean, circuits in the circular economy are not necessarily closed locally. So it's not necessarily the case that recycling will happening exactly where the waste is created. We can go into this a little more in detail later, but basically you can have recycling happening somewhere else or repair happening somewhere else. So therefore also the jobs that are created of those circular activities do not necessarily need to happen within the boundaries of one country, but they can also happen elsewhere depending on how local or global this web of the circular economy is cast. Then finally, there's a question to consider on the job duration, because jobs can be created for the transition towards a circular economy, or jobs can be created for running or operating the circular economy itself. And for instance, if you move to a low carbon economy, you have a lot of jobs that are needed to build up wind farms, for instance, or to develop and build up solar panels. But then once these are in place, you have those jobs fall out of the scope again, and you only have jobs that are actually needed to operate those wind farms and to operate those solar panels. And a similar dynamic can also happen in the circular economy, where you have quite some jobs that help to move towards a circular economy. But once you actually have achieved the state of a circular economy, there may be less jobs needed to actually operate this. So these are just some considerations that I wanted to throw out there for the discussion later on, and maybe I can pass it back now to Lisa for the next pitch. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Frithjof. Wonderful. Even more questions on the table. One thing that I see as a common theme with Martin's presentation is that you need to really look in detail about what we are talking about when we talk about the circular economy. But before getting into a discussion, I want to now invite Wairimu to give her pitch. Yeah, so it's starting up.
Yep. You can go full screen.
There we
Yeah,
are.
perfect.
But you're still muted.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great.
Great. So my name is Wairimu Mwangi from Kenya, and I work with Loopworks Ventures. And generally, we assist enterprises to rethink their business models towards circularity. So my topic is going to really look at what does a circular economy mean for the future of work. And my context is going to be Kenya. So I will. Is it? I don't know why the slides are not moving. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
I don't know why my slides are not moving. So just give me a second. Okay. So I'm going to focus generally on the Kenyan context. So just by looking at where we are and how our economy is modeled. So, and generally we have a linear model as far as the structured economy is concerned. And I will give a context of the banana value chain, which will help us perhaps conceptualize this better. And then I will look at circular economy being a desired model in terms of unlocking work opportunities in Kenya. So then I will then get into the limitations and the recommendations. So in Kenya, based on the Economic Survey of Kenya of 2023, it states that we have about 13.4 trillion in terms of our GDP, which is the gross domestic product. And the dominant sectors here are services and agriculture. So services is generally around tourism and trade. And then a close second is agriculture. And then when you look at the employment sector, we largely have an informal sector, which is more than 80%, 82.9%. And then we have the formal employment, which is 17 or towards 20%, which is quite low in terms of comparison. So in the informal sector, we largely have like casual laborers or seasonal work, you know, people who work for a certain season and then the next season, there's no work for them. Or we have like more of survival businesses. So people running their own businesses, but they are just, they just make money on a day-to-day basis. And in terms of employment, distribution in terms of sectors, the leading is manufacturing, which is a new phenomenon. We had agriculture become, which was the main one, but now we are moving. It's a good thing now that it looks like value addition is beginning to happen, and we are having manufacturing taking a lead, which is a good thing. So when we look at the structure of our economy, and this is largely around the formal sector, because that's the one that, that is better tracked. We have a sort of linear model. And I'm going to give an example with the banana value chain to sort of explain this, explain what the linear model looks like. But this is really more of a representation of other sectors as well. So generally, we have like extraction of resources, in this case, bananas from the environment. And in the case of bananas, we mainly utilize only the fruit. So the fruit is the one that now has been better exploited within the value chain, and we leave out other parts of the banana plant. So it moves from extraction of the say like bananas, and then some element of value addition, which is generally around moving the bananas closer to the market. And then we get to the market. I mean, the users or the households and other institutions buy the bananas and eat them. And then the residue is discarded in the form of into the landfills. So if we look at the beginning here, from the extraction of the bananas, there's usually a lot of waste that's generated there, in the sense that we only utilize only one part of the banana. So everything else, like the pseudostem, the rhizomes, buds, and all, are left as waste. So some of them are fed to the animals, but most of them end up as waste. So what happens in this case is that, because farmers generally have adopted like quite unsustainable farming methods. So we have like farmers using a lot of chemical fertilizers and a lot of unsustainable models. We generally have, what we are seeing is, before we used to have, like, bananas used to be very hardy crops, but over time they're losing that capacity and becoming more affected by pests and diseases. And then because of that, then the farmers, because what the output then becomes an inferior product that then introduced into the value chain, and the farmers have to continually use chemical fertilizers to compensate, and the cycle continues. So in terms of job opportunities here, we generally have farmers and input providers that provide that are generating revenue. Then we move towards transporters, and then from there we can have minimum value addition in terms of banana chips or crisps, like we call them. And then the retail sector, and it's worth noting that at this level here, we have a lot of control by brokers. So control by brokers means that there's quite some price distortion. Because of such a linear economy, it becomes more susceptible to abuse. So there's little then that accrues to farmers and the retailers at this level. So the implication of this sort of model we see is that we have less jobs, because we are only utilizing one product vis-a-vis what the potential other sort of jobs that would emanate if we had more products. Then we have low quality of pay, because the market is distorted. And then we have lots and lots of waste generation. And waste generation is an indication of an optimized resource. And then we have unsustainable extraction, which then provides that downward spiral of inferior products, and the whole cycle continues. And then what I mentioned about fewer products being generated. So when you look at what a proposed model around circular economy, it's generally based around 3 principles. Well, this is derived from Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And one is about elimination of waste and pollution. And elimination of waste and pollution, means that we'll have a healthier environment and a healthier economy, because the economy feeds from the environment in terms of resource provision. And then we have a situation of optimized resource opportunities, because waste is generally a byproduct or an implication of resources that are not well utilized. Then a regenerative and nature, because of the whole healthier environment where we're relying less on resource unabated resource extraction, and then we have less and less waste going back into the environment. And circulating products as the third one at their highest value. So if we look at a lot of sectors, including this one, a lot of products that are introduced within the economy are of an inferior quality. Like manufacturers are constantly seeking to increase their revenues by compromising on the products that are made. And then that, of course, results into less the users are not able to use that product for a longer time, and it ends up in the environment as waste. So circulating those products within that value chain then sort of reaps more rewards also for the manufacturer in terms of unlocking different business models that the manufacturer can use. So basing it on these three principles, we see circular economy model being a preferred way even to unlock work opportunities. So if we refer to the banana value chain scenario, we see in the case of at the beginning is the banana plant being well optimized in terms of providing fruits as it is now, and then the fiber is utilized for other purposes such as apparel or making shoes, sanitary towels, and so on. And then the fruit, the buds, and the leaves, and all of that can also have more value addition and unlocking more value addition through processing of that to make crisps, banana flour, vinegar, sauces, wines, cosmetics, and so on. So the field is big, but what this means is that these are different industry formations that then will unlock another area that has potential for more work. And then at the end, where we have waste residue from the process, it's turned into fertilizer, which then is fed back into the process. So this scenario is in keeping with the circular economy definition of a multiplicity of value, which then gives more work opportunities. So to summarize that, we're seeing the conversion of waste into various resources, and then optimizing resources, which then lead into new product ranges and newer industries, or even just expanding the already existing industries. And then because we have more potential for more jobs, we'll have more higher quality of jobs and more sustainable jobs, in the sense that we are running a more sustainable ecosystem so that can be able to continually sustain these jobs. But also we foresee more focus being on this sector. So towards the future, then more resources means that jobs will be sustainable. And then a regenerative ecosystem that is sustainable and supports the ecosystem. So maybe just to think through about why is this model not working as currently, I would zero in on the fact that the four main actors of the economy, that the government, the knowledge generators, and the innovators or industrialists and consumers, tend to operate in silos. So meaning that the fact that they are not sharing value amongst one another presents a very weak system, which is what we are seeing within a linear system. But to transition towards a circular economy will require that there is co-creation of solutions between these 4 elements of government. And we've seen best practice and things working, for example, with government working with the industrialists or with the innovators, particularly like say in the case of plastics, the plastic value chain. Initially, it was the government banned plastic bags, and there was a quick solution for that. And so they ended up feeling that it was possible to actually accelerate that towards other packaging, plastic packaging. And what happened at that point, there was a bit of a backlash. And they realized that working together with industry would provide a better solution in creating value. So where the government expresses their expectations, and then industry responds by providing their status or their capabilities, and then the two working together to provide a solution. So this is working well because industry then has targets that policy or government is able to actually keep evaluating and seeing whether they are attaining that, and also providing incentives where they feel they need more assistance to unlock that. And then in terms of knowledge, we have a lot of information or data that is stuck within government institutions or even research institutions. So innovators find it very difficult because there's usually they don't have like a seamless deployment mechanism that innovators are able to access this information. So it becomes very difficult, again, to sort of to work around innovating. So with this, it would be interesting. Right now, we have the government unveiled an open university, which I feel is a good way to sort of democratize a knowledge generation and even deployment, because then you have the different actors because they're all holding knowledge, within their spaces. So they're able to actually share and engage with innovators, and even students are able to pick this. But as a notch higher, I think it would also be interesting to have like an open source where innovators and industrialists and everyone else can be able to actually access this information so that they know how to product design and development. And then the last one is consumers. Again, consumers are left almost in the dark. So in terms of understanding, being in the loop to know that whatever is being produced is addressing their needs becomes a big challenge. And what we see, especially in our context, is a lot of mistrust for, when there's a new product in the market, there's usually a bit of wondering whether it has been well regulated or that it actually addresses the needs as they claim to be. So, and circular economy model, in terms of catalyzing that model, would really require a system-wide approach where the 4 main actors are interacting to create solutions. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have 3 perspectives on the table, and I will open it up for questions from the audience very soon. But before, I would like to give the speakers once more the opportunity to react to each other. And in the case of Martin, I would like to combine that with a question that came up in the chat during your presentation about the repair sector and how that fits into your model. So maybe you could speak to that, but also react to Frithjof and Wairimu's presentation briefly.
Yes, I read it, and that's a very important point. We didn't include, or I didn't include the repair sector in the presentation. It's simply because of the project we are doing, because we are not working on the repair sector. But the repair sector is a very important discussion, basically. I think we have to differentiate between maintenance in a more general way and repair. And we have to differentiate between consumer products where the circular economy issue is very much important. Do we repair our consumer products, or do we don't repair them? And because maintenance on the other side is, well, quite regular, done at least in specific countries and economies. But on the consumer side, we have two problems. We have the problem that specific products like electric products are substituted by electronic products, and combustion engine products. The African colleague mentioned the part of motorcycles, which is important was in your presentation. But we can see a shift from combustion engines to electronics, battery engines, and so on. And these two major shifts will change the repair sector. So repair is important. We have to look very closely. We have to look whether we talk about maintenance or repairing consumer products. It's a good example for regulation. The European Union is trying to regulate repairing, forcing producers to make products repairable and so on. This is a good example for the importance of regulation. And basically, at least in Germany and in some other countries I know, the informal repair sector, it's both formal and informal, as Piotr mentioned. The informal repair sector is a community building sector. They are people meeting. So the issue of repair is not just about, circular economy, it's also about community building. So that's my reactions to the repair issue, which really is an important issue. Some two quick reactions to my colleagues. Wairimu, your perspective is very important because you mentioned the value chain perspective. Because often circular economy is discussed in a materials chain perspective. And you mentioned the value chain perspective. Where is value produced and so on? So and this is a very, I want to highlight this in your presentation, not looking at just about materials and energies and things like that, but also value. Where is value produced and where is value used? And there again, we have the political issue, because value is not an economic issue alone. Value is also a political issue by regulation and other things. So that is a reaction to yours, but a value chain perspective. And to Frithjof, just one point. Well, as a sociologist of work, it's difficult for me talking about forecasting, but I think it's important. It's very important to do these types of forecasts you mentioned. At least in my discussion, there's also the running gag. Forecasting is difficult, especially because it's about the future. And but I would ask you, or for our discussion, make one point. Forecasting is very good if it includes scenarios. So I would challenge you a bit to talk about scenarios inside forecasting, because if you build forecasts on scenarios, you have all of these political, regulatory, and so on issues again on the board or on the table. So that's the two comments to my colleagues.
Thank you so much. Well, that's perfect, because that directly hands over to Frithjof with a question, but feel free to, of course, also react to other points.
Yeah, thanks. No, I mean, I can just directly respond to this. No, I totally agree. Forecasting is useful in as long as you know what you're actually forecasting and what it means, because obviously forecasting is not equal to predicting the future. No one can predict the future. You can only make different scenarios of what could happen in the future. And indeed, I mean, I have talked about one scenario, but if on this one slide where we did the review, we've actually reviewed 47 different scenarios. So all of these have different configurations, and therefore also lead to different results. And in the composition of looking at all those scenarios, you can also then provide a little bit more of conclusive outcomes of what it actually means if you tweak a little bit here or tweak a little bit there. Then yes, I have two reactions to both of my colleagues. One is, and that's picking up on what Piotr said in the chat, that circular economy is not just recycling, it's also repair. And I would actually go beyond that and say circular economy is more than just recycling and repair, but circular economy, or the circular economy, yeah. And it's this circular economy, but also the aspects of the circular economy, and therefore the jobs that are involved in the circular economy, touch upon more aspects. It touches upon, besides recycling and repair, also on reusing materials, on just aiming to reduce consumption in the first place, looking also into the new business models. You could have the sharing economy, so just using the existing stock more efficiently, and you have a lot of jobs that are linked to this. Just think about Uber and, you know, sharing car models and the jobs that are created to this, or also using things as a service, so the service-based economy. So all of these are aspects and business models that are linked to a circular economy. So it's really important to stress that when we talk about a circular economy and circular jobs, it's not just recycling and it's not just repairing. It goes beyond that. Then another comment that I had on Wairimu's presentation, and that really struck me, is the large share of the workers that are working in the informal sector. I think on the slide it said that 83% of the whole workforce is informal, and that of course has quite some policy implications, because it's a lot more difficult to influence informal work conditions, and also to lift those informal workers into a formal economy that then can also benefit from better working conditions and from more environmentally friendly working conditions. So there's really a challenge here to also think about, or to at least consider that when we look outside of Europe there's a large share of the workforce that is informal, and that also has some implications to policy design.
Thank you so much. Wairimu, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So perhaps to just address the comment around the informal sector. Yes, it's worrying in the sense that a lot of the economy is structured around the informal sector, and in fact, a lot of circularity happens more within the informal sector in a more survival way. If you talk about like recycling and reusing and all of that, or collecting garbage and all of that happens within the informal sector. But we look at that as, like you rightly put, that circular economy is not just the tail end of recycling and reusing, but we are also looking at designing products or designing materials that will then be introduced within the value chains. So we look at the informal sector currently as a failure of policy and even markets, in the sense that being formal is very costly. For even within the linear model that's working right now, it's still very difficult for a lot of people to operate within that. There are lots of shocks in terms of business development that they would have to go through. So, and what we are seeing as a push is towards more incubations, setting up incubation platforms that then provide a holistic interventions for innovators, so that it becomes easier for them to ideate their solutions with in a less costly way, and provide a better environment for them to compete. So because of that, then we perhaps then see so the formality is not forced on them, but it is something that they graduate towards, because then it makes sense economically for them to engage. But the current model is as is. But maybe to just react to the two, what is interesting is how different the realities around circular economy are from a more mature market and an emerging market like ours, in the sense of even the focus on materials. For us, our materials are still largely unexploited in that sense. Like there's less data. Like if you were to track, like specific data even around plastics, that is something that is beginning to now, be tracked. But before, we had very little data around some of these areas. And we're looking at paper, we're looking at, like specific textiles. So that in itself is not data that's available to sort of have meaningful deductions to say where are we at in terms of circularity. A lot of focus has largely been around looking at value chains and seeing where are we playing at in terms of that and who is engaging more. So in this case, we have a lot of recycling and a lot of reuse and less of product development, because a lot of product development is done elsewhere, saying like in the Western countries. So when resources are extracted, they leave the country and come back as finished products. So that's what we currently see.
Thank you very much. Well, that is definitely one of the interesting questions here. Who benefits in what ways from circular economy models? Where is the value creation taking place, and which workers, formal, informal, are then really the beneficiaries? I see a hand from Mirjano Radovanovic. Are you ready to raise your question?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great, wonderful. Please
hello.
raise your question.
Hello from Serbia. Thank you for this webinar because I heard so many interesting things. I just want to say maybe we have participants from all around the world. So Serbia is in Europe, but it is not EU member. We are EU candidate for, I think, 20 years now. And I hold PhD in energy science, so I'm more introduced with electric cars and batteries and so on, but I'm coordinator of the project on circular economy in rural areas. And we have a problem here now because we are under, our government and our country is under huge pressure to build, to develop mining of lithium here in the part of Serbia, which has, I think, the most fertile land in Europe and so many water resources. It's unbelievable how rich that part of Serbia is. And to us as citizens is presented that, okay, with that lithium mining, you will get more working places. And that is the first and most important argument for us. Okay, accept lithium mining because you will employ so many people there. In agriculture, you have small employment, but you will employ, I think, 2,000 people. Okay, they will have some salaries and so on. And so I don't know what to think about that. So we have to destroy fertile land and water resources to provide lithium for electric cars in, let's say, in European Union. And the working places are used as only argument. And people want to work. People want to have salary. That is a social issue. And people maybe don't have all information about the future and what we will destroy that land permanently. Does anybody has anything to say about working in countries which are not rich as European Union and production of something which is circular, environmental, and needed for circular economy? What we should do, should we keep our fertile land and water? Because I strongly believe food security is much more important than something else. Maybe some comment about, we have to decide, and it's very complicated. Any help, any advice, any opinion? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this. This is indeed one very interesting question. And the lithium thing is not only playing out in Serbia, but also in other poorer countries. I don't know who of the speakers would like to take the floor on this.
Just a small comment. I already started to put it in the chat. Well, if you look for employment, I would say, at least from my knowledge, mining is not the sector I would invest into if I'm looking for employment, because it's capital intensive, very, very capital intensive. It's very few employment in the mining sector. So it's not a good idea. It's just a political selling argument, employment. So you can argue economic and not only ecological, as you did, which is quite important, but you can also argue economically. Is mining, investing in mining, a good idea if you are looking for employment? I doubt.
I also, but the pressure by international companies is huge. Nobody's asking me or academic society about that. I'm just mentioning this as something what is happening in, let's say, poorer countries. Nothing more than that.
Well, let me maybe connect this to a question that was raised in the chat about paradoxes in the circular economy, because what you're describing has at least certain paradoxical features. People say this is for a green future, circular economy. I don't know whether electric cars are actually fully circular, but I mean, that's the political rhetoric around it, at least, that it belongs in a sustainable field. And then the paradox is that in order to make that possible,
we have so many paradoxes.
Yeah. So and the important addition that Noreen Manipal added is, how do stakeholders manage these? And if I may, I would add another layer to the question is, which stakeholders actually have the right to have a say in this management? And what you told us about Serbia is that there's a big imbalance between international companies and the local population in terms of who's really deciding about these things. So I'm not sure whether anyone has an answer to that, but I think it's also important to at least be clear about the paradoxes that are there. Frithjof or Wairimu, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, so these were a lot of questions put together into one question, which is a little hard, but I'm just gonna try and reflect on some of those aspects. So first of all, maybe just picking up on, I mean, I'm by no means an expert in the lithium value chain or anything, but I do second Martin's point that, and that you've seen this on the slide already also, mining itself is resource intensive and relatively labor intensive. What is more labor intensive are the stages that are happening after the mining. So the processing and basically the converting of lithium into batteries. So what you could, and maybe what is also meant with, you know, the job creation that is then coming to Serbia is not necessarily only from mining the resources, but then also all the processing kind of activities that are settling close to the mining sites, which are then converting those into batteries. One aspect that I wanted to mention just more generally on the electrification is that, you know, now we are all focusing on building up batteries and moving to electric cars. All of this will also at some point become waste. And it's quite variable waste because there's a lot of critical raw materials in it. And there will need to be a recycling infrastructure that will need to be built up to recycle this waste, and also skills and labor workforce that is, you know, recycling this waste. So countries could also already anticipate this and think about what kind of recycling infrastructure do we actually need to recycle car batteries. And what kind of job opportunities are linked to those also. So that's just on the lithium part. The first comment that came to mind with me on the question of what is the key paradox, I think the question was, what is the key paradox of the circular economy? I mean, to me, and I think we need to be open about this, is a circular economy can never be fully circular. And that is the first thing. Like, it's impossible to fully recycle everything and fully close the loop. So even whilst we talk, we aim to move to a more circular economy. In fact, what we mean is we aim to move to a more circular economy where we reuse as much as possible and recycle as much as possible as we can. So I think this is something to keep in mind, that there is losses throughout the value chain, be it a linear value chain or a circular led value chain. And yeah, maybe I'll leave it with this, and then I can come back later again.
Wairimu, do you want to add something?
Yes, I quite agree that it's difficult for us to actually move to a full circular economy. But I think what we are trying to agitate for is that at least we have products that remain in the economy for a very long time before they get back to the environment, so that the environment can have capacity to assimilate some of these products. Because when you look at, say, like in the case of Africa, for example, it's become a place where almost like a dumping ground, so that everything that's happening around the world is ending up in Africa as waste. So the assimilative capacity of the environment is really curtailed. So if we adopt models where materials circulate within the economy for a very long time, it then gives a better, maybe delays the process until we keep, because circular economy is evolving in terms of like the solutions, the technologies that can help us keep dealing with some of the challenges you're facing. So at least that will, one, in a sense, buy time for some of the materials that don't degrade, and maybe we don't have current solutions for those. So, but the ones, of course, that degrade will then, degrade, which is fine. But for the others, I think it would be nice that we adopt models where we are, solutions are modular solutions, like shared models and all of this that ensure that we are decoupling more from resource extraction, and products are staying within the economy for a very long time. I think that will buy us good time to as we keep evolving.
A quick reaction from my perspective. The biggest paradox from my perspective is that it is a very simple, good, convincing idea to have a circular economy. And most economies built on circularity in traditional times. It's a very good and convincing idea, but it's very, very difficult to get there. This is my perspective on the biggest paradox around the circular economy. And there's at least one reason why it is so difficult to get there. It's because you have to have different actors, to connect different actors, to have cooperation between different actors. And as our world, the small worlds and the biggest worlds, are very much separated and fragmented, this is one of the biggest problems of the circular economy from my perspective. Of course, it's a sociological perspective.
Well, thank you. Well, one might even say we are not just fragmented, but we are stuck in the old model to some extent, and that gives certain players a lot of power, and they use that to stay in the old model maybe. But that's the political philosopher in me. I wanted to come back to one question in the chat that Andrew had raised earlier. I don't know, Andrew, if you happen to be here and want to present it yourself, you can do so. Otherwise, I would read it. And the question is, he says, we've talked about recycling and repair. What about arguably the first element of the circular economy, which is reduce? How perhaps do we facilitate a shift towards subscription models? Also, it would be good to get your take on the viability of industrial symbiosis and symbiotic supply chains, both on a local and an in brackets, national scale. So there we also have a connection to the degrowth discussion, if I read reduce here correctly. Who wants to take on this question? Is the circular economy a model to get us to reduce? Does it require that maybe? Or is it still a model that builds on economic growth in a new sense, trying to reduce resource use, but still relying on an idea that something needs to grow, and therefore ultimately we're back in the linear model? That would be a criticism that you sometimes hear by more radical critics of the current economic model, that circular, at least the way in which it's sometimes used in politics, is a bit like green growth, in the sense that you want to look green, but actually you're still caught in a logic of more, just more of a different thing. So do you think that's a justified charge? And how do you see the relation between circular and the debate about growth versus post-growth or degrowth?
Well, partly it is, I would say, but not in general, because it depends on how do you measure growth. This is again the point of Wairimu, if you have a value chain, and if you put value on reusing, on repairing, all of these different things, if you put value on them, then it is a growth model. But you can also take it the other way around. If you take everything into an informal sector, and the people get their living from other areas, then it's a degrowth model. So it depends very much how do you define growth, economically or according to materials, energy, and things like that. That would be my answer, at least.
Thank you. Frithjof, Wairimu, do you also want to chime in, or should we?
Okay, so maybe I can attempt that. So in the context of Africa, there are always these discussions that we are blessed with natural resources, and that our economies are young, and this is where we will derive most value from. So if at a fully decoupled economy from natural resource extraction, is difficult to see how that will look like in the present context for us, in the sense of we highly rely on like our key sectors like agriculture are reliant on natural resources. And so it's difficult to see how then do we completely move away from that, and you know, like it's the present model is that we utilize the natural resources that are available, but in a very optimal way, that then if we have an efficient value chain, then we have less and less need to keep going back for resource extraction. But there has to be an element of resource extraction that has to take place for sure. But, you know, if we optimize the value chains, then there's less need to keep doing that. That's why as we carry on, then other models begin to be explored on that then transition from a bit of the decoupling from natural resource extraction. But then we play out, the economy now plays out in another league, so to speak. But currently the way we are, being a young economy and, you know, highly dependent on natural resources, I think we're at that point where the discussion is quite divided.
Thank you. I see another question in the chat, which is about inclusivity. So how can value chains be made more inclusive in the light of the circular economy? And that in a way connects to a point that Frithjof made at the end of his presentation in the further considerations, namely about what kind of work will take place where in the global economy, and what kind of challenges of inclusivity does this raise? So that's indeed something we should maybe shine more light on, because it sounded to me, Frithjof, as if you had a slightly critical perspective on that. Maybe you can expand a bit.
Yeah, so I mean, so how can value chains be made more inclusive? Well, so I just wanted to reflect basically on the concept that a circular economy doesn't, or closing circles in a circular economy doesn't necessarily mean that this has to be done locally. When you think about, if you want to have economically efficient, well, if you want to have recycling of very small material waste streams, you need to group them more than just from countries. So you need to basically have one recycling facility that is able to import waste from other countries. And therefore you have a circular loop that is not a closing in just one country, but it involves trade and waste, and it involves kind of including other nations in your circular economy in that sense. So basically what I wanted to link upon with this point on the slide is that you need to have, for certain closing of loops, you need to have a minimum economics of scale in order to just make it viable. And to achieve this economics of scale, you need to also then engage in trade of waste, and trade of secondary goods for repair elsewhere, etc. So this is what I wanted to link on, this debate versus a local versus a global circular economy. I wanted to link on in the slides, and this then also has consequences, of course, for job implications in certain countries.
Thank you.
Sorry. I don't fully want to go into the post or degrowth discussion, but I just had one point with regards to the previous question, because for me, it didn't read as this reduce was actually meant as reducing growth. And I think also the reduce in the circular economy is not necessarily meant as reducing growth, but the key of the circular economy, what it aims to achieve, is to reduce the environmental impacts that are linked to the economic system, whether it's a pro-growth or degrowth economic system. So it's really, I mean, the key objective is to reduce environmental impacts, to reduce waste, to reduce raw material extraction, and to maintain products and sorry, I'm just losing my video, but I think I'm still here. To maintain materials for as long as possible in use. And if you increase lifetimes through repair and basically have products that are in use for longer, inevitably you will also then result in a reduced consumption, because you reduce products that are longer lasting. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this reduced consumption leads to degrowth necessarily, because you have growth in other activities, such as, for instance, in repair activities, to ensure that those products are running longer. So it's basically just a shift from growing on the costs of the environment and on the costs of raw materials that we extract from the environment, towards growing because we have a growth in service, in the service-based economy, and we have people and jobs that contribute to the value in the economy through repair activities and through service-based activities. So this is just what I wanted to reflect on.
Thank you very much. Wairimu or Martin, do you want to add to that?
So maybe just to share my sentiments around, I think this is a very good question on how can value chains be made more inclusive in light of the circular economy, and especially because of the way economies are structured between, say, like the West and maybe the global South and the global North. Like what we know that, you know, a lot of resources are generated from the global South. They are fed into the global North. Products are made, and then waste finds itself back to the global South. So thinking that in terms of a circular economy, it's good to appreciate the dynamics as they are happening now, so that we do not continue to perpetuate this model where, you know, the compensation is happening from one place, but value is accrued more in another place. So I think when we're looking at that inclusivity, I think it would be interesting also to really look at the underlying factors that as they exist, and so that we're careful to move away from that, and that value is accrued, you know, like proportionately across board. So I think that's a very interesting question, so that as we are thinking of these solutions, I think it's good to take that into account.
Thank you very much. So what does emerge very clearly is that there are deep questions about what we mean by value and how that then influences who benefits from the models that the circular economy delivers. I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. I don't also see any hands raised. In that case, I want to throw one big question as sort of the final part of our discussion on the table. And the presenters knew that I would raise this question, so they had some time to think about this, because it is a difficult question. But the question is, what do we need in terms of regulation? What policy recommendations would you have from your perspective for the circular economy to be a program that would also deliver good work and that would be just and really, you know, make the world a better place, to put it very generally, rather than just a kind of buzzword that gets thrown around? So where do you see the greatest need for policies to change? What would be your one pitch if you had the chance to talk to a politician about this? Or maybe several. We have a bit of time, so if you have several, you can also bring these to the fore. Who wants to start?
Okay, I take it. Well, I would say it's again my point that the idea of having a circular economy, that you have to reuse materials, that you have to reuse, or you have a energy which is used in a circular way, that you have materials that are used in a circular way, even labor, work in the perspective of a circular way, and all these things. For me, it's again the point, it's a very good basic idea. And the paradox is that it's so difficult to get there. So if you ask me the regulatory issue, then I would say we need basically global institutions which dare and which have the power to make regulations according to products. These are some of these points which started in the European Union, regulating all kinds of different product-related issues. That would be one way to getting a step further, regulating value streams globally and so on. But as I guess everybody knows, that's one of the biggest problems we have. Where are these institutions? Where are these processes that coordinates, make cooperation and coordination globally? So it's not a question where to regulate, it's a question how do we get institutions that make regulations? That would be my answer. But products play a very important role in this debate.
Thank you. Frithjof, do you want to take over?
Yeah, maybe I can follow up. And I think my response to this goes back to just what I said before, basically. I mean, when we shift from a linear to a circular economy, we try to shift from raw materials to recycling, or to secondary materials, to just more recycled materials. All of those circular economy business models, including recycling, are more labor intensive, and labor is expensive because labor is also taxed, whereas raw materials are often not taxed, or at the very least under-taxed in our economy, considering all the environmental impacts that raw material extraction results in. So my plea would basically be to shift the taxation from the labor costs towards more taxation on raw materials. And you can do that by, one, of course, introducing more or higher material taxes, but then also by using the revenues that you generate from those material taxes to subsidize labor, which then also encourages more labor-intensive circular activities, such as, for instance, more recycling or more repair, because that becomes cheaper, whilst buying a new product at the same time becomes more expensive because the raw materials in that product become more expensive. So this is something on a macroeconomic scale that countries can do to shift towards an economy that encourages also growth in jobs, a growth in the labor-based economy that is pushing towards a circular economy, and that reduces also the heavy use of virgin and raw materials in a linear economy.
Great, thank you. That's again then raises the question of which institutions would do this. So we are back to Martin's question, but it is, of course, a big thing. Labor and capital and raw materials. How do they cost to companies, and what does it mean for the value chain? So thank you. Wairimu.
So for our situation, which is a bit still different in the sense that our realities on the ground tend to be different in the fact that we actually have a bigger informal sector that's difficult to sort of track and like fashion or channel towards a more structured circular economy. So I feel like local solutions, just doing an audit on our current realities as say a country or a continent, and understanding what are the dynamics that we face, and then moving from there to the globe. So understanding where does now the globe meet us at that point? Because generally what we see is that we do not have a good understanding of our local dynamics, but we are taking on global recommendations that then undo potential benefits that we would have had if we approached it the other way, so that we understand, so that whatever it is that is done, it becomes like some sort of win-win situation, in the sense that it doesn't curtail growth, because we need growth, but also that it has to be responsible growth that does not ruin the economy. Yeah.
Thank you very much. There are more questions now appearing, but unfortunately we are at the end of our time.
I think Lisa's been having some internet issues, and I think they might have resurfaced at the moment. 1 second.
Maybe I can quickly jump in then by thanking our speakers. This is obviously what Lisa wanted to do. Thank you all for your valuable contributions. Also, thanks for everyone in the audience to all your valuable questions. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to drop us an email. We will send you the recording of the webinar, as well as I have to double check with all the speakers if you're comfortable with us sharing your presentations as well. Yeah, perfect. Then we will also do that. And thank you all very much, and have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.